Welcome back, and what a delight to have back with us today our good friend Liz Peek. She's a columnist for FoxNews.com and the Fiscal Times. And by the way, her website is Liz Peek. That's PEEK.com. Hi, Liz. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
Fine. Good to see you. By the way, that orchid behind you is beautiful.
Thank you.
Well, listen, last night, Super Tuesday, any surprises to you?
I don't think there were any surprises. I mean, honestly, the polling turned out to be reasonably accurate. Maybe it was a surprise that Cruz won Oklahoma. That was a nice win for him. A little bit of a surprise that Rubio won in Minnesota. That was good for his party. Obviously, he needed his followers. He needed a win, particularly after Donald Trump has been so aggressive about talking about he never wins anything. But look, I mean, Donald Trump was surging in the polling going into Super Tuesday, and I think that's kind of what we saw. I think the most remarkable thing that's been happening, and it's not much commented on because it sort of undermines the argument from the New York Times, which ran a big story today about how the GOP was falling apart, is the voter turnout in these primaries. It's in the first four, you saw 26% more people turn out to participate in the GOP primaries than had happened in 2012, which after all was again a contested election. Meanwhile, the Democrats' participation is sinking like a stone. And I think what you see from a recent CNN poll is that people just aren't very excited about voting for Hillary Clinton. There was an excitement about Bernie Sanders, but I think after South Carolina, people kind of began to get their heads around the fact that Hillary really wasn't going to let Bernie Sanders win this thing. And there's just not much excitement on the Democrat side. So, how that all plays out, honestly, I don't think anybody knows at this point. But it's something that the New York Times should be a little careful about because they're all happy to think that Hillary is going to cruise into the White House. I don't think it's that simple.
All right, there's a couple of things that have come out of last night that are interesting. One, Cruz did win Alaska. What does that say about Sarah Palin's endorsement of Trump?
I think Alaskans are over Sarah Palin. Remember that she quit her job and didn't finish out her term as governor, which I think many may have sort of thought was dissing the state. But by the way, have you noticed, where is Sarah Palin? I mean, she was sort of like a hot ticket for the Trump campaign for about 30 seconds, and then she was done. So I don't think she obviously didn't have much impact on that state. Who knows, right?
Well, Cruz is now at 161 delegates. Trump is 285. If you take Rubio and then the remaining ones who are in the race, the Kasichs and even the Carsons, it's not quite the runaway for Trump yet, but it certainly seems to be leaning that way.
It's pretty hard to figure out how anybody else is going to win the nomination at this point. I think it would require some really catastrophic thing happening in the Trump campaign. And my gosh, we've seen about 10 catastrophic things happen to date and hasn't had any impact whatsoever. I think now people really should start to focus on how do Republicans win the general election if Trump is the candidate. He's clearly focused on that. And last night, gave a somewhat more tempered speech than is his norm. I wouldn't say it was, without a few hiccups in terms of civility. But the truth is, I think he is beginning to get his head around the idea that he actually could be the nominee and that he actually could become president. And guess what? That's what the numbers sort of suggest. The Hillary Clinton team apparently is ecstatic to be running against Donald Trump. Only her husband, Bill, whose political instincts are way better than Hillary's, is a little worried about it. And I think he's got the right tack here. People just, again, if you look at the polling data, you look at the turnout in these primaries, people are not very excited about voting for Hillary Clinton. A lot of Republicans may hold their nose to vote for Trump. My guess is they'll do it.
Okay, that sets up the next series of questions, and that is that from what I understand and read, Trump's negatives are higher than Hillary's in some areas. So there doesn't seem to be enough blue dog Democrats to make up for that gap. Do you think the establishment Republicans will rally around Trump in the end?
I think they will. Here's what he could do to make that happen. First of all, start talking about who his cabinet might look like, or who the people in his cabinet might look like. All we've heard so far is Carl Icahn. And I'm in New York City. Let me tell you, Carl Icahn does not have a great reputation here. That's not the guy I would want out there as my Treasury Secretary candidate. He hasn't really specifically said that, but that's been sort of the hint. But I think Donald could really begin to embrace, some sort of not the establishment Republicans, but he could start bringing in some people who would give his team credibility with that crowd. And I think that would be a good move for him now. It wouldn't undermine him with his own followers. Nothing undermines him with his own followers. So why not begin to kind of build out from this very strong sort of insurgency candidate, kind of a better platform. And by the way, if he really wants to accomplish any of the things he's talking about on the campaign trail, if he's president, he's going to have a vice president who really knows and understands Congress. And with the anti-Washington bashing that's been going on, he may have a hard time finding somebody who can really navigate the halls of Congress effectively. And you really need to do that. That was Joe Biden's job when Obama hired him to be, or asked him to be, his vice presidential running mate. And Trump is going to need that. Trump doesn't know a thing about how to pass a bill in Congress. And even though President Obama has largely bypassed Congress and made them look effectual, the truth is the country, I think, wants this to work. They want some things to get done. Trump wants to get things done. So he needs to sort of start reaching out to some people, not on the Tea Party fringe, who have been bomb throwers in Congress. That's not going to do the trick. They can't get things done. But to some regular people in Congress who have, let's imagine for a moment Paul Ryan. He probably wouldn't take the job, but somebody like that who's pretty popular, who's smart, who has considered a lot of different policy issues very carefully. I think that kind of person would bring this candidacy a lot of gravitas.
Interesting you say that, because one of the articles the last couple of days, because of the assumption that Trump's going to be the nominee, that Carson seems to poll very high as a running mate. But given what you just said, Carson doesn't know the inner workings of Congress, but yet he seems to be polling very high as a running mate. What's your thoughts?
Well, I think he's a lovely man. I've met him. I was privileged to have lunch with him. Really, really decent guy. Again, knows nothing about Congress or the workings of government. Americans are sort of happy to assume that a complete neophyte, political neophyte, can be very effective as president or in Congress. But let's just think for a moment. I mean, you wouldn't hire a lawyer to drill your cavities, right? I mean, there is some expertise that comes with being a professional politician. I don't like lifelong politicians. I totally believe in term limits, and that this is something where there's, the political class is sort of a dirty word, and I kind of understand that. But Ben Carson's a nice guy. Maybe find a room for him in the administration. But no, they need somebody who really knows how to write legislation, knows how to pass legislation, because Congress needs to get to work again. And if Trump wins, he'll have a majority in Congress. He won't have any excuse, as Obama has had, about obstructionism. He'll be expected to deliver on a lot of his promises. For example, building the wall. He says Mexico will pay for it. I really have no idea what that's supposed to look like. But if the United States taxpayer is going to pay for it, he needs to get that appropriation through. All right, how do you do that? Trump doesn't have any idea. So he needs someone who can maneuver.
That's going to be interesting. Let me take a quick break here, Liz. We'll come back. I got several more questions for you. By the way, we're talking to Liz Peek. She is the columnist for FoxNews.com, also the Fiscal Times, and her personal website is lizpeek.com. We'll be right back.
I'm Paulina Leiser, producer of Focus Today. Thank you for watching this video, and make sure to check our other videos at theDove.us.
Okay, welcome back, and what a delight to have back with us today Liz Peek. She's a columnist for the FoxNews.com and also the Fiscal Times, and her website is lizpeek.com. You may want to check that out as well. We're talking about the results of Super Tuesday. You know, Liz, again, back to Trump's negative just for a moment. If he becomes the nominee, he may have successfully crushed the establishment, but he may also have isolated himself from the conservatives. What would be your advice for him?
Well, again, outreach. This has been a really particularly nasty campaign season. And so, you know, there's a lot of fence mending to be done. And I think those negatives could come down a bit if some of the people that have been campaigning and crusading against him are brought into the fold. I mean, after all, look at Chris Christie. He wasn't exactly, I mean, that's a case of the lion lying down to the lamb or vice versa or whatever. He was not a fan of Donald Trump. He's on video, you know, a gazillion times talking about he's unfit to be president. And there he is standing behind him looking sort of like a, I don't know what, a stooge. But anyway, Trump can begin to do that with other people who've dropped out of the race. If Ben Carson decides to leave the race, I'm sure that Donald Trump will be after him to support him. Remember, going back to 2008, the Obama and Hillary Clinton camps could not have been more at odds or swords points or however you want to describe it. And yet Hillary Clinton ended up in the Obama White House for better or worse. So these things can happen. It's a matter of political convenience. And I think the Republicans are going to be very importantly embracing a lot of the new people that have climbed aboard. Again, that is the most stunning thing that's happened, is that you have all these disaffected independents, left-leaning independents, and some ex-Democrats joining up the Republican Party. I think that's going to make for a very interesting dynamic. Donald Trump is not a conservative. I think we can agree with that. He wants to call himself that because this primary season requires support from conservatives, and he gets a lot of support from conservatives, but his policies are not conservative, and he breaks with the conservative orthodoxy on a bunch of issues, including, for example, supporting Planned Parenthood. He does it in a rather dexterous way, but the truth is he is not embracing an all-out assault on Planned Parenthood, and that's just one example. There are several others. So I think we'll find that he's more nimble than expected. I think that we'll also see him reaching out personally to a lot of people who could help him, and particularly people on the right. By the way, Ted Cruz is one of those. If Ted Cruz doesn't win, my guess is that Trump will reach out to him and bring him into the fold. They're being pretty careful with each other right now. They were initially, if you recall. And, you know, Cruz could bring what might be a sort of disaffected group to the Trump campaign if he climbs aboard. And my guess is down the road he'll do that.
Hearing these little olive branches in his rhetoric, even last night during his speech, he said, well, I congratulate Ted, da-da-da-da.
Right.
So those are little olive branches there. Okay, well, at the very end, if it's Trump and Hillary, we have capitalism versus socialism.
Well, maybe. Hillary Clinton has been pushed very far left, and I think she inclines pretty far left and has ever since her college days. But let's face it, she governed, or her husband governed as a moderate. Hillary's learned some lessons from that. When she was in the Senate, you know, she actually did, according to people who worked with her, try and reach across the aisle. She tried to work with left and right. All this populism and progressivism from Hillary is bogus, I think. She's been pushed by Bernie Sanders as the campaign goes on. Let's see really what the residue of that is. She has very strong ties to Wall Street. A lot of very wealthy people support her. She's not going to be able to talk about you know, the kind of tax rate hikes that Bernie Sanders is pushing and issues on that of that sort, and command any, you know, continued loyalty from her Wall Street backers. Privately, they all say, well, she doesn't really mean it. So, I mean, I always hate it when there's a campaign where the contestant is running on things they don't believe. And by the way, I think it would be interesting to hear her speeches that she's made to the Goldman Sachs audiences, et cetera. I know what she said. I'm sure what she said is, we can work together. Well, I understand that you all are struggling with all this increase in regulation. We're going to make it work because we know that finance is an engine of the economy, things like that. And guess what? She's right. I mean, you do need to have successful financial flows in an economy to make it grow and be strong. So Hillary is, towing a line now that I think is, again, somewhat bogus. And Trump, really, we don't really know much about Trump's policies. His tax policy seems kind of reasonable. But when he starts talking about ordering companies around, demanding that they not go outside the United States to manufacture, that's not capitalism. I don't know what that is. That's like, a despot. You can't tell Ford where to make automobiles. That's not how our country works. You can entice them to be in the United States with lower corporate tax rates. That makes sense. But, a lot of what he's talking about is very far from being fleshed out or even sensible at this point.
Very, very interesting. Because on the other side, Hillary seems to be running on the premise that Obama didn't go far enough. I want to go further.
Right. Well, and let's face it, that's where the left is right now. Look, the biggest issue dominant in this campaign is what's happening to working class Americans. And nobody really wants to tell working class Americans the truth, which is that when you are competing, as we are now, with countries around the world who pay their workers a fraction of what American workers make, it's extremely difficult. And when you combine that with the forces of automation, which everybody kind of writes about and talks about, but no one really pays any attention to the fact that so many jobs are being lost to robotic manufacturing processes, not only here and overseas. And when the conversation comes around to the minimum wage, the people promoting a much higher minimum wage know perfectly well that tens of thousands, if not more, jobs will be lost because those flippers of hamburgers aren't going to be flipping hamburgers 5 years from now. That will be done automatically. The major food chains are already experimenting with that. Guess what? It's not an impossible thing to convert your facilities to largely automated manufacturing. And this is a very scary thing for working people. I think we need to deal with this. I've talked to Mike Bloomberg about this on occasion. We need to deal with it in a really intelligent way. And it's not simple. It's not one-liners or sort of sound bites that'll get the job done. But if we want to protect jobs, we need to start thinking about how we're going to do that, because I do believe people need to work. I think it's good for the soul, good for the economy, and it's good for the country.
All right. So Trump says, all right, I'm going to bring all these jobs back from China. I mean, basically creating an embargo. I mean, what kind of a crisis is that going to create?
Well, again, he said two things about China. One is he's going to slap big import tariffs on Chinese goods. What's the impact on the cost of living for the average American? It's substantial, because if you remember back in the days when Walmart was getting beaten up by the SEIU labor unions, they put out a lot of interesting studies on how Walmart all by itself had lowered the cost of living for Americans. Why? Because they were importing cheap goods from China. By the way, it's really not just China anymore. A lot of companies that manufacture, particularly apparel, for example, that used to manufacture in China, China's too expensive for them now. So now they go to Vietnam, Thailand, Cambodia, other sort of Asian countries where labor is even cheaper. This is a fluid situation. You're not going to stop it unless you demand that Americans pay $20 for a T-shirt that they're used to paying $10 for. Americans won't put up with that. Doesn't work.
Yeah. Liz, let me switch over to the Supreme Court opening, and I can't imagine that Mitch McConnell would risk his position of being majority leader in the Senate by allowing a nominee to go to a vote. Do you think they'll hold the line?
I think they will hold the line. I hope they'll hold the line. And I have to say, and I think it's incredibly important for the GOP leadership to show that they can stand up to the Obama White House. But I think also morally, if that's the right word, or or in terms of ethically, this is a perfectly reasonable place to draw the line. And I've had this debate with many of my Democrat friends. I have some. And here's why. The fact is that Obama has more and more legislated unilaterally via regulations and executive orders. And in so doing, he has purposefully cut out Congress's role in running the country, but also invited basically the Supreme Court to act as referee. In no contest that I'm aware of do you change the referee in the middle of a contested game. That's just not how it works. Obama has led us to this point where the court is deciding not only his immigration executive order, which is a very big deal to Americans, but also is deciding on the EPA regulations, which could shut down our coal industry, also a very big deal to Americans. So we have at least two issues, and there are others, which need to be decided by the Supreme Court because Obama has failed to work with Congress. And that is how the GOP needs to message this. You know, Democrats are very good, and you've seen this over and over. When there's an argument, all of a sudden, 40 Democrats have exactly the same words coming out of their mouths. I mean, it's like they're parrots. Nancy Pelosi says the same thing as Harry Reid, etc. The Republicans never do that. On this issue, they need to do it. They need to lay the blame for this hiatus in the Supreme Court's total functioning squarely in Obama's lap. He has not worked with Congress. He has not tried to work with Congress. Instead, he's written them off and done all this stuff on his own, and that's where we are. And that's why if I were McConnell, the only thing that's going to happen to McConnell and the other GOP leaders by stonewalling here on agreeing to hear about a new nominee is that they'll get, blasted by the New York Times. Seriously, who cares?
Boy, I think you're spot on with that, because how else can they recover from passing the omnibus bill?
Well, I get what they've been doing. I kind of understand it. I'm sympathetic, because if you go back to 2013, the whole shutdown of the government was a disaster for Republicans. They have never polled so badly. Thankfully, an incredibly inept Obama White House rolled out about 6 disastrous policies and failures in a row, which led to the 2014 election, which became, as you recall, a referendum on Obama. Thankfully, it wasn't a referendum on the Republican Party. But look, they want to be viewed as sound, as able to manage the government, but this is their moment, and I don't think they'll cave. They shouldn't cave.
Well, let's hope not. All right, I got about a minute left. Tell me, so you think Trump's going to be the nominee? You think it's all over?
Well, I think the betting is now, at 90%, the odds makers are, or something like that. And yes, is there a path to, let's suppose that something just completely god-awful emerges about Donald Trump, which voters simply can't swallow. There is a path where the convention is held and he doesn't have a majority, and on the second or third vote, whatever it is, that basically the delegates choose someone else. I think when you have this much support for a candidate and you're bringing in so many new people, that would just turn into an absolute catastrophe for the party, and I really don't see that happening. So I think it's Trump.
Okay. Well, Liz, you're a delight. Thank you for what you do. We value the time that you give us. And let me say to our viewers and listeners, you can certainly read her at foxnews.com. She's a columnist there, and also for the Fiscal Times. And her own personal website is lizpeak.com. Thank you, Liz. Let's stay in touch, see how this thing rolls out. We got I guess the end of Rubio, if he doesn't win Florida, he's done, right?
I would think so.
Yeah.
And I got to say, the polls don't look good.
Yeah, well, Trump said last night he was going to spend a lot of time there. That's got to be Rubio's nightmare.
Well, and by the way, Trump is there. Don't forget, the clubs are there. He lives, he spends a lot of time in Palm Beach, so he's not a stranger to the state.
All right, great. Good to see you again. Thanks for your time. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.